if you talk to Yang we are talking Yang to CRD and JSON. At the end of the day, it's not just no. It's one in syntax, but so the thing that does the conversion has to do it in a declarative way. So that means it has to do the diffing. It has to see is it still in line. So it's not just hey, I have a Yang file. I map it to a CRD. We have to have a declarative operator that basically takes a snippet of the config and actually applies it and sees that it's always aligned with what you intended to get as a configuration. So it's generating JSON from Yang. That's straightforward. The difficulty is making sure that in a declarative way you deal with the operations of the changes that you're going to get from that configuration, and that's the challenge. And do that at scale. That's a difficult task.
Exactly. So I wrote such an operator, and I'll demo it in our upcoming automation. Yeah, we're working this.
Generate them. So in the meantime, I take Yang.
So I agree 100%. Well, I'll add to this, Yangs are data models, right? So they imply, what's important about Yang is the semantics behind them, right? So, and the relationships between the data models. And that's not immediately apparent from, you can read the 200-page spec from 3GPP, and that will tell you what the names of the entities are, but the semantics of how they relate to each other isn't immediately obvious. But if you understand that, so it's not Yang itself, it's the documentation behind Yang that explains what these models are and how to use it. Those are the semantics. And if you encapsulate those declaratively, then we're ahead of the game. I will add one last point, sorry, about CRDs. I know a lot of people make a big deal out of it. It's very important for us to define the CRDs very, very, as a community and make sure we all agree of them. I think I might be the only person here who doesn't think it's a big deal at all. For me, the really important part is the philosophy itself. If we're working declaratively with CRDs, one implementation might have a cluster defined in this way with this set of properties. Another implementation could be something else. I mean, we already have multiple implementations, things like cross-plane, cluster API. I don't think that's a problem at all. As long as we're all working within the declarative resource model, yeah, there'll be different properties for everything. There's always going to be integration work. We're not going to clean up and create some lowest common denominator that works for everything. But as long as we're all working within the same paradigm of generating custom resources and reading and reconciling them, we are already so much ahead, right? So yeah, we'll define the custom resources that evolve. And we can spend weeks creating a custom resource in the Nepio community, and then vendors won't use them. They'll decide to use their own. Just like they do with the Yang models, the 3GPP Yang models, who really uses all of them, all the properties there? It's designed by committee stuff. And a lot of times some properties, the property might be there, but it actually has a different meaning for two different vendors. We see this all the time. Yang does not equal Yang, right? So, yeah.
Haven't been through the Yang revolution, if you will. The challenge speaking as a vendor, it's in such a way that you have an implementation, right? So now all of a sudden we get a Yang definition by someone. Mapping that to your internal schema is not straightforward, right? Because we all came from a different philosophy, and what you then see is you can do translation, but if you have different Yang files defined by different teams and stuff like that, they are not always aligning, so it's a big challenge at the end of the day. And there are some efforts which have succeeded more than others, but I think, in my view, if I look to Nepio, we should design it in a way that we are not tied to a specific vendor model implementation, because you can always do a mapping. And if you look at if we build the right implementation or the right design and framework, it should be fairly straightforward to do so. Mm-hmm. And I think, because if we come up with a data model and we say, okay, Nokia, Ericsson, you have to implement, it will take ages. Mm-hmm. And it will take a long time, lots of effort, and the data structures of the implementation that we have right now are probably not suitable and very different between even Nokia and Ericsson right now. And then mapping to them, it's going to take a lot of time because it's not straightforward in the implementation to do such a change.
It's about the meaning, it's not the actual.
So, but William, I want to ask the question, right? Because I'm going to just be brutally blunt, right? Okay. So what you said was, and the inference was that we're going to have vendor-specific, and maybe if I'm wrong, please correct me, vendor-specific CRDs at that point, because you have
Yes,
the.
yeah. So my view of the situation is the following. At the end of the day, we need to talk to a network element, which is a CNF, a PNF, or a VNF, right?
Sure.
It doesn't matter whether it's which X it is in front, it's a network function, let's say it. And my view of the world is they will all have their specific implementation, right? And that will stay like that, I think.
For a while.
It will never, doing such a change, it will never do, because every vendor still tries to differentiate left, right, and center.
We've been doing this in devices. And
Correct.
it's been for 25 years, and guess what?
Yeah.
Still don't have 100%. Go ahead.
And if we would agree with my approach, that means that there is a vendor-specific CRD that represents that device or that network function. And right?
But I thought there was a concern in the community of a proliferation of operators.
Right, but that's just one per network vendor and network function. Okay, so that's not 100,000, if I think that's maybe
2 or
20.
3 per
No, let's say-
function, because I got 3 vendors
Correct. So
per operator.
So it's one per function and one per vendor. So it's like if you take AMF, Ericsson, Nokia, you will have
Sure.
two for AMF, 2 for SMF, 2 for
Sure.
UPF. And
Now, if you're a hyperscaler,
Yeah.
and now you've got a bunch of ODMs and OEMs, and now you take that 2 and add a little 2 on top of it for exponential, and now you're at 4, and then you're at.
no, sure. I mean,
and
it
then
will
you're
not
at-
it will not be 0, right? But it's also not going to be
Yeah.
100,000 and stuff like that. So it will be in the 10-ish, 20-ish.
I just want to make sure that we understand that there's not one operator. There's going to be a number of operators that are going to end up being vendor-specific for a long while.
At the lowest level.
And,
Yeah,
and maybe forever.
yeah maybe
Until
forever,
you can
yeah.
really get into the intent-based modeling, right?
But-
Which is going to be a couple years down the
But
road.
even in intent-based modeling, in my view, we will still have the device layer will still be vendor-specific. And
Oh,
I
yeah,
think
yeah. So the operator, yeah.
Yeah, and then there will be an operator that does that, but then you have a mapping that is vendor agnostic, and you have to do that translation.
So I think the idea is we have a minimum supported set of CLDs, so there's an expected behavior that we can get cross-vendor. And then vendors have their own operators. It's always been something we expect to happen.
Yeah, we do expect vendors to have their operators, but we expect that it's sort of like the northbound interfaces that our automations need should be in the Nefio CRDs. And then for modeling purposes as much as possible, those CRDs can capture all the common elements, and that way you can automate. The more you put into that layer, the more you can build common automations. But at some point, southbound, it's a vendor-specific device that has its own specific configuration, and it's got to render that configuration somehow, either through talking to an element manager or through rendering a config map or through some other mechanism, netconf or whatever. So that southbound is going to be, it may be operator, it may be CRDs, or they may be able to consume the common CRDs plus a little vendor-specific delta for their differentiators and render directly via netconf down to the device without ever translating and creating CRDs at their vendor-specific layer. Right? So it could be built into the operator, is what I'm saying. The translation of the Nefio common to the southbound APIs. So but there will have to be a vendor operator because we can't dictate to the vendors, here's how you're going to be configured. Right. I mean, we could try, but I think we would fail. So, you know.
So,
What you can do is give them a pattern by which they can go off of. Sorry. I was just saying, the best that you're going to be able to do, at least for the short intermediate term, is to give them a pattern of a CRD of that type, UPF, that they can start with, and then they'll extend the heck out of for their operator.
We don't want them to use it as a pattern. We want them to use it directly.
Yeah.
And
But they're
then
going to have to extend
They
it.
may lay next to it something for their differentiators. So this is where the packaging comes in. So if you if you recall in the demo, we had, when we created the UPF topology, we point to a class, which in turn points to a package. That package actually has the UPF deployment and one vendor-specific CR in it, which is
Image path.
something our
Image.
free 5GC operator uses to find the images, rather than embedding and hard coding within the free 5GC operator the image location. We provide it as part of that package. That package never, that resource never has to change. It's just part of that package from the point of view of me using that package, but it's sort of a placeholder for this idea of a vendor-specific data that's bundled in with the package, sitting alongside the UPF vendor-neutral record.
Yeah, I mean, for every rendering, we kind of expect to have a vendor package, the common package, and then also an infrastructure one.
Yeah, I
One's
think
where you're saying,
yeah,
you know, for particular deployment, you have to go into like Google Cloud versus something else would be different. Right. A different configuration.
you guys are bringing a great point in terms of having to have this at the CRD level, intent-based or the declarative configuration, as opposed to basically having to have this imperative one, right? Which is essentially going. So at the CRD level, it won't be like UPF or anything like that, right? You will be basically talking about, okay, can I talk? Can somebody at a policy level, you can say that if user A can talk to user B. How you implement it is totally different, right?
Well, that's an even higher level intent that we
Yeah.
aren't addressing yet.
Right. So,
Yeah.
so if I recall correctly,
So no, that's kind of not correct, because we do want to kind of level off deployments. Deployments, UPF versus deploying SMF are actually different.
at the
So
deployment
we
level,
do
yes.
want to have
Yes.
a way to express that. And then the big intent is you'll be able, as a network function vendor, which I don't know, Broadcom, I don't know. Well, not as a function vendor, but network function vendor, you have to be able to express your intent to the infrastructure provider also.
Fine.
So that's one of the big things, one of the big gaps that we don't see anyone filling right now, and Nethios would like to address that.
So one of if I recall correctly, in the first summit, Bikash actually mentioned something about Google has some of the data models that are intent-based. And then, he basically mentioned that, Google plans to open source them, which currently are used in, I believe, in Orion or something like that, right? So I don't know when those...
I don't know anything about that.
Yes, there is a desire to open source. Some of it we will not be able to open source, even though there's an intent.
Yeah.
But look
There's an
forward,
intent for
it's
intent.
in the
Okay.
works. Yes.
Okay. All right.
I mean, a lot of the, if you, I think this was mentioned in the June summit, like a lot of these things are modeled after, like Kubernetes was modeled after Borg roughly, but you couldn't open source Borg. It's so tied tightly to our physical provisioning layers and all of the things we do, it would be useless to anybody else, right? So we had to build Kubernetes instead. Similarly, while we may have these techniques are things we may be using internally for things like GGN or whatever, they're the techniques that we're bringing to Nepio, not the code, because it's not useful. It's just so tightly tied to assumptions about our physical infrastructure and things like that, that it's not useful outside.
Right, so we should go back to Stephen. He's been patiently waiting on the podium. So Stephen, why don't you finish your
so after
slides?
this, let's skip the CLD watchdog. We'll have that, and then we'll vet the CLDs. And then, so this is, we don't expect that for V1. We don't expect vendors to jump in and start claiming support of Nepio CLDs for R1. But then after that, hopefully there will be more vendor interest of doing so. And then for them to claim that support, though, we would have to run tests, obviously. And then we have to certify it. And then some of the times we do know that maybe perhaps some of the vendors require some specific hardware to run. And in that case, it would also be nice if the vendors can donate the hardware to the community. Not like donate it physically, but then at least make it accessible by the community. So that would help on the certification testing moving forward. Again, this is definitely post V1. I don't see that happening on V1. And we actually talked about it to death already, but then there will be SDK developed because we do obviously know that NF vendor support is really important for Nepio to be successful. So we are trying to make life easier for vendors to get on board. One feedback that we already got very quickly is that writing controller and with Porch is actually not very trivial. So we'll definitely like to build something that helps you build a controller. Yeah, go ahead.
Go back one. So I just want to say something about the certification.
Previous? Okay.
Yeah, of the CRDs. So if you're going to expect NF vendors to claim support or be certified for a particular CRD version, that better be self-certification capabilities in place, because if it's not, you're not going to get those NF vendors to pay for certification to it. Now, if you can somehow come up with a process by which you can self-certify and verify, then, or authenticate, whatever you want to call it, right, then I think you'll be successful.
I think it's something where we, as a community, come up with a certification test that would test against this. So as I said, if you have hardware needs and things, just make it accessible, run those tests. I mean, self-certify, meaning that you can run your own test there, but make the results presented to the community. That's the very least. And a step further than that would be making those test labs accessible by community, so we can run continuous tests off of that. That would be the greatest. So we may be something in between, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Just from my experience with Kubernetes, which I'm involved with the conformance project in Kubernetes, we would probably do something a little bit like that, which basically we have a suite of end-to-end tests. Now, it might be a little different for Nephew because there's certain things we want to do, but we have a suite of end-to-end tests in Kubernetes that if you're a Kubernetes distributor, like you create OpenShift or you create GKE or whatever it is, you run this set of tests against it, you submit the logs to the CNCF, and the CNCF has a process that validates that all the tests ran and that they passed. And you provide a reproducible process so somebody else could do it other than you. That's the trickier part if you've got proprietary hardware involved. But we'd have to figure something out there. But effectively, yeah, it should be a automated self-certification program in that sense.
Yeah.
And at least in Kubernetes, all that actually controls is whether you get to use the trademark Kubernetes or not in your product name.
No, you don't have to pay for it, for sure. We know that. It's just that we would have to make sure that you are running the set of tests that we actually published as a community. And again, going back to this, so making developing a controller easy is not easy, and then we would like to help. We'll be publishing some SDKs that is part of SIG3. Maybe it gets spin off in the future, but then for now, any tools that are easing developers is part of this. There's the Vim Yang models changing CLD things. It may actually even be able to auto-generate a skeleton of a controller. So we'll be doing that. And then as we build more and more operators, particularly, we would know where there's a set of reusable libraries, and then we'll publish those and make sure that they can be easily linked into your controller. And then that would definitely, it's an evolving field. They will probably do a lot more work for this. And that's it. Thank you.